This episode of Fearless Rebel Radio is brought to you by You on Fire. You on Fire is the amazing 12-week online group coaching program that I run, where we build up your worth from the ground up so that it's no longer hinging on the way that you look. It's got personalized coaching from me and incredible community support, plus lifetime access. Get details on what's included in this program and sign up to be notified when doors open for the next cycle by going to summerinanen.com/you on fire. I would love to have you in that program and in that group. This is Fearless Rebel Radio, a podcast about body positivity, self-worth, anti-dieting, and feminism. I am your host, Summer Inanen, a professionally trained coach specializing in body image, self-worth, and confidence, and the best-selling author of Body Image Remix. If you're ready to break free of societal standards and stop living behind the number on your scale, then you have come to the right place. Welcome to the show. This is episode 136, and this is the first installment of Classic Rebel Radio, where we revisit an episode from the past as I take maternity leave. Today, we are revisiting the interview I did with Isabel Foxen Duke about how to stop feeling crazy around food, which originally aired September 16th, 2014. This was like revolutionary then. And I'll be answering a listener question on how to work through fear of weight gain. You can find all the links and resources mentioned in this episode at summerinanen.com/136. And in case you haven't heard, as I just mentioned, I'm currently on maternity leave until spring 2019. So the episodes you are hearing here right now originally aired in the first 2 seasons of the podcast. They are some of your favorites and some of mine, and I hope that you enjoy re-listening to them again or hearing them for the first time. Before we begin, I want to give a shout out to Michelle, who left this awesome review. I love listening to Summer. She has great guests with an amazing perspective on body image and nutrition. I love her get off the diet mentality attitude. I can't wait to listen to more. Awesome. Thank you so much for leaving that great review. Leaving a review helps others to find the show and the information you're learning here. You can do that by going to iTunes, searching for Fearless Rebel Radio, and then click ratings and reviews and click to leave a review or give it a rating. And I also just want to give a shout out to everyone that shares the podcast in their Instagram stories. I always check out the stories when you tag me, and I really appreciate that too. So thank you. And lastly, if you haven't done so, definitely subscribe to the show via iTunes or whatever platform you use. And don't forget to get the free 10-day body confidence makeover at summerinanen.com/freebies with 10 steps to take right now to feel better in your body. All right, before we get to this old school interview, I'm going to answer this listener question from Lois. I've accepted my body now, but I worry that it will change and get bigger. I don't know how to deal with that. Okay, so this is really common. And I think when I see people move along the spectrum of acceptance and of body acceptance, I see them most people come to a place of acceptance. They can feel neutral in their body now. But there's still that worry that it might change. And we have to recognize that is what fat phobia ingrains in us. It is the fear of weight gain and the belief that thinner is better. And so when I hear this, I think, okay, well, there's some fat phobic beliefs that need to be challenged and worked through. And that takes a long time. So I think it's really important to go easy on yourself here. This is not your fault. You can't just switch off these beliefs. They're constantly being reinforced in our culture. And you've probably been believing this stuff for a really long time. So it's not your fault. Have some grace. This stuff takes a lot of time and energy to really overcome. And I think that ultimately, when you get to a place where you can just surrender control, like when you truly believe I don't have control over my body size, like my body's really just going to do what it's going to do, and my destiny is not dependent on that, then it makes it so much easier to let go. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But if I were to give specific advice here, number 1 is challenge the fat phobic beliefs. So what are you afraid of happening? What does it mean if you gain weight? What is the deeper meaning that you've attached to it? Is it that you won't be attractive? And if so, what's important about that? Is it that, you're afraid your partner will leave you or he won't be able to have a relationship? Or is it that you're afraid you're not going to be healthy? I encourage you to really break down, what is the deeper meaning that I've associated with this? And then let's challenge that, let's challenge those things. So health, what we've learned about health and weight is so much of that is untrue. And I highly recommend reading the book Body Respect by Linda Bacon if you haven't, to learn more about that. And as it relates to maybe relationships, let's challenge that. Do you want a partner that loves you conditionally based on your body? I hope not. And so we can break down what it is. And once we can really identify what it is, we can identify the fear and get to the root of what's behind those feelings. And that makes it easier for us to challenge them and perhaps give ourselves some compassion around that sense of fear. So that's number one. Number two, stay in the present. I think it's kind of like worrying, okay, what's going to happen to our world? What's going to happen to our environment? What's going to happen if I get on a plane today? There's so many different worries. And I think when we get caught up in future thinking, it's never helpful with anything. So having a practice where we just come back to the present. What is actually happening today? How do I feel in my body today? What's going on in my life today? How is my health today? Anything else that feels relevant and important to you. And check in with that. Because that's the most important thing, is the present moment, because we can't control the future. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if something catastrophic is going to happen tomorrow or later today, or if something wonderful is going to happen. And trying to control it is only going to give us anxiety about what might happen and make it even harder for us to really surrender. And so that was the other piece, is about surrendering control. So number 3 is surrender control. So, this idea that we can control our body and therefore control our destiny is so false. It is so false. And so I encourage you to really just kind of sit with uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen in the future, and get comfortable with that. They say that we're more afraid of uncertainty than we are of death. And I think that, that's what's coming into play here. And so if we can just really practice surrendering, and however that is for you. So some people it's about, kind of like surrendering to a higher power. For some people it's just this, whatever, I trust that I'm going to be taken care of, or everything is out of my control, whatever kind of a mantra around surrendering works for you to really let go of control. That's what I would encourage you to practice there. And then the last thing I want to mention is that, sometimes when we have fear over the future, we have this desire to kind of control what's happening now. It's often because there's other stuff in our lives that's making us feel that way. So check in with your life right now, with your relationships, your work, your life. Is there anything in there that feels out of control, or that's giving you anxiety that you're perhaps then turning to your body to try to control? Because we believe that we can control our body and therefore control our destiny. And that gives us a sense of safety and certainty, but it's a false sense of safety and certainty. So that's the other piece of this. And I included this question in this particular episode because Isabel and I get into this, and she blows it up in this episode about challenging some of those fatphobic beliefs too. So I think it's a really good fit, and you're going to have even more clarity when you listen to this episode. This is by far one of the most popular interviews that I've ever done on Fearless Rebel Radio. And I think it's because Isabel has such a great way of explaining things. And at the time of this recording, which was 4 years ago, this all still felt so revolutionary to me, and I think to a lot of us. If you think 4 years ago, I did not know this. She's a trailblazer, and the points she mentions in this episode still hold up. I listened to it again, and I was like, yeah, this stuff is all nothing's changed. It's all good. So I hope you enjoy it. And if you need support around changing your relationship with food, I highly recommend getting Isabel's free video training series, Stop Fighting Food. You can find the link to that in the show notes for this episode at summerinnanen.com /136. It's great and it's free. And if you are looking for further support around that down the road, consider joining the Stop Fighting Food Masterclass that she runs. I know several people who have done that and found it to be incredibly helpful. So full disclosure, I'm an affiliate for that, but I truly do feel strongly and endorse it because I think it's got really good content in it. And I know people that have found great success going through that program. So again, get the free video training series. You can find that at summerinnanen.com/136 and enjoy listening to this episode. What's up, everybody? I am beyond excited for today's guest. She has inspired me so much, and I have honestly been anticipating this episode for months. Today's fearless rebel guest is Isabel Foxen Duke. Isabel Foxen Duke is a certified health coach and emotional eating expert. She helps women make peace with their bodies so they can stop obsessing about food and get back to living awesome lives. That may sound familiar to you. Her areas of expertise include binge eating, emotional eating, and chronic unsuccessful dieting. After years of trying to overcome emotional eating through traditional and alternative approaches, Isabel discovered some radical new ways to get women over their food issues once and for all. Isabel has been featured in the Huffington Post, Elle Magazine, XO Jane, and has been praised by Ricky Lake. She is changing the way women think about food and their bodies from the ground up, not just by shifting the mindsets of individuals, but by creating a greater cultural revolution. I love that. Her writing and free guide, How to Not Eat Cake, can be found at isabelfoxenduke.com, which I will link to in the show notes. But I am so excited to have Isabel here today because, if you know me and you just heard her bio, we obviously have a lot of the same philosophies and ideals, and she is one of my favorite people to follow. So I'm super excited to have her here and have you get to know her too. So welcome to the show, Isabel.
Thank you, Summer. I'm so pumped to be here. Yeah, let's do this.
So before we get started, I always, I love our listeners to know a little bit more about you. So do you want to just kind of talk to us about, I guess, your story and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, totally. I mean, so, I like I even just mentioned to you kind of off radio, I grew up in a really intense diet culture, really, really just sort of aggressive focus on the body all of the time. Most of the people who listen to me and read my stuff on a regular basis have heard the story of how, my doctor put me on my first diet when I was 3. It's just been it was always an obsession. My weight was always an obsession, throughout most of my childhood. And obviously, therefore, dieting was also an obsession throughout most of my childhood. Very quickly after I started, screwing around with all these diets, inevitably, right? Like the binge eating comes eventually. I think that there's actually been some clinical studies. I know Linda Bacon in particular has done a lot of, working around this and learning about this, about the idea that the more you diet, the less capable you are of actually being able to sustain or maintain a diet, like just from like a biological perspective. So it's like, I used to be able to go a month to sticking to a diet. And then it was like down to 2 weeks. And then it was down to 1 week. And then it was like, I couldn't go a day sticking to a diet before I like completely fell off the wagon and like lost my shit with food. I'm like, when I say lose my shit, I mean like knee deep in the cabinets, like eating condiments with spoons out of the containers, like frantically rummaging through the cabinets, like just eating everything that isn't nailed down. Like that was my story. I was a diet binger for most of my life. I think at some point, along my story, part of my story is that I, was like, oh my God, I'm so desperate to be thin. And, I couldn't figure out how to control myself around food, right? That was my big thing, is I couldn't figure out how to control myself. If only I could stick to my diet. So I was like using like stimulants to control my weight. Like I kind of just decided I'm just going to eat Adderall and that will be great. And then I won't want food and I'll just have something else to focus on. And that eventually landed me in some treatment, that eventually landed me. That was when people were like, Isabel, maybe you should talk to somebody about this. So anyway, so I actually, I was in, I, saw like every therapist under the sun. I was in, clinical treatment for binge eating disorder at the time. Mm-hmm. And, it was a very long journey where there was a lot of information that was not necessarily super helpful to me. I remember at one point I was in therapy, and therapy was super helpful in the very beginning. And then at some point it was like, okay, like, at some point I got the message, go to Overeaters Anonymous. And that's just where you can kind of like live your life managing your food for the rest of your life through this 12-step program. And in a way, so like the idea, I was on a meal plan, basically. I was on the whole idea was kind of like, again, teaching people how to control themselves around food, like teaching people how to just stick to their diet was kind of the idea. And I could never do it, right? Like I could never get time, as they say in OA. I could never get time. I always ended up binge eating eventually. Like I would stick to my meal plan, which was just a different version of a diet, but it was like the politically correct way to say diet.
Yeah.
And then I didn't have the willpower in me. I just couldn't stick to it. I was working through all of my emotional stuff. I would I'd done so much emotional work and so much spiritual psychology. And, I felt like a very, such an enlightened person relative to everyone else. I was really up on my self-help high horse, except for the fact that I couldn't stop fucking binging, So, anyway, eventually, as one does, I thank God was introduced to like the concept of intuitive eating, and Janine Roth and some other really great writers talking about intuitive eating. Most of whom were talking about intuitive eating for weight loss, which was really attractive to me because I was like, I just want the answer to being thin right now.
Yes. And
learning that, I can listen to my body, like, oh, my body is giving me information, So that really helped me get over, that helped me stop thinking of foods as good and bad, which I think is like, a really important step in this process, right? Is like legalizing foods and not thinking of food as good and bad is a big part of ending is like step one, in my opinion. I think that's sort of like step one of ending sort of the binge eating stuff, is like not having illegal foods.
Yeah, I actually did a podcast on that, podcast number 2, for those of you wondering.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was huge, but I was still binge eating, because I still was approaching intuitive eating like a diet. Like at some point it was like, I would beat myself up if I would eat when I wasn't hungry. I would beat myself up for quote unquote emotional eating. Mm-hmm. And that ended up backfiring, right? Like that ended up binge eating. And what I realized, that was really sort of like the beginning of what I do today. That was really when I started to have these realizations around what I now teach, which is, it's not about intuitive eating versus being on a meal plan versus this versus that. Like that was sort of like, it's not OA versus therapy versus whatever. Like it's this idea that as long as I'm shaming and judging myself and have this idea that there's a way to eat that's right and a way to eat that's wrong, regardless of what that right or wrong way is, it's kind of doomed to fail from the beginning, because there's an element of like, I am not in control of what I eat. Like I am going to slip, in quotes, like I am going to eat. I can't stick to anything. Like, that's the whole point. So, like, why am I even trying? What if I actually just wasn't on a wagon to begin with? As I say, you can only fall off the wagon if you're on a wagon to begin with. So it became this whole thing where I started to realize like, it's not the strategy. It's not the, intuitive eating versus the diet versus the meal plan versus this. It's like you can approach anything like a diet if you're thinking about food is like diet mentality thinking, right? Like if you think about food like it's something that can either, if you're good at it, if you were good that day, then you're a good person. If you were bad at it that day, then you're a bad person. Like if what you're eating is like dictating your self-esteem on a day-to-day basis, like it's only a matter of time before you're going to fall off that wagon and your self-esteem will come crumbling with it. And that's when we fall into binge eating, in my opinion, is like when our self-esteem is crushed by something we ate. Like, oh, I ate a cupcake when I wasn't hungry. I suck. I'm going to go have like 3 boxes of Nilla wafers to make myself feel better. Or because tomorrow I promise I'm only going to eat when I'm hungry. You know, so it was like very, I just started, like, something clicked, and that's sort of like what I'm really trying to do in the world right now. It was like something clicked where I realized it wasn't about intuitive eating versus the meal plan. It was about like not hating myself around food, and like not having to be any certain way around food. Just like letting things sort of be as they are. And when I started living from that place, when I basically just said like, fuck this, like I'm not in control. I give up. I surrender. I let my food be what it's going to be. I let it be whatever it's going to be. Like if I eat a cupcake when I'm not hungry, I eat a cupcake when I'm not hungry. If I eat an entire jar of Nutella, like whatever, it's all okay. When I like finally got into the mindset of like, it's all okay. Like, I'm not going to let what I eat determine how I get to feel in a given moment. What ended up happening is my food just became normal, like magically. Like, it was just like, oh my God. It was like, it lost its power. Like, if I don't give a shit about food, food has no power. Like, if you decide you don't give a fuck about what you're eating, it has no power. It ceases, like, who cares? It doesn't matter. It becomes irrelevant in your mind.
Yeah, totally.
So that's sort of, you know, that's my mission, you know?
Yeah. And I think it's, you know, it really comes back to relieving the shame and the guilt around food choices. And specifically, you know, you mentioned, you know, when your self-esteem is dictated by your food choices. And I think it's not just food either. It's exercise as well. I see this, you know, in the same light. And so, you know, where does the root of the work come from? You know, like, is it from then, okay, let's shift this and really start working at it from like an internal self-esteem perspective? Is that kind of what you're saying here?
Yeah. Yes. Yes and no. I mean, it's interesting because, like, on the one hand, I think that I always thought of myself as a person who had like pretty good self-esteem about everything except for my body and food. Mm-hmm. And that's because I had made the decision that there was a right way to eat and a wrong way to eat. And because I had made that decision that there was a right way and a wrong way to eat, if I didn't eat the right way, I sucked around food. So, like, in my opinion, it's like, you know, and again, this ties into body image, which we'll like get into, I'm sure, in a moment. Yeah. But the idea is, like, I'm not sure that, like, you know, that I think that this is a problem that anyone can fall into if they make that decision that there's a right way and a wrong way to eat. I don't think you need to be like a fucked up person or have like, you know, like childhood insecurity issues. Like, I had a really healthy, happy childhood. I think of myself as somebody who's I was very like mentally healthful in like pretty much like all areas of my life, except for the fact that I couldn't stick to the right way of eating, you know? And so I think that that's just sort of like for me, it's a clear, it's not that I think that there's not something wrong with a person because they can't stick to a right way of eating. I think the problem is that we as a culture have decided everyone seems to have the right way of eating. Mm-hmm. And that's become like the new religion, is like, there's the right way to eating. And if you're not doing it, you're like doing something morally wrong.
Yeah. And so with that, you know, let's then tie that to body image. Like, I think a lot of that comes from this need to, you know, appear differently because your life is going to be better if you lose weight. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really what we're talking about here is coming to the root of it, is that a lot of these issues around food come from, you know, that internal struggle to like want to fight against your body and change your body because you don't like the way that it looks.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, like, the only reason anyone has shame and judgment around food is because they're terrified of the quote unquote consequences of anything they eat, right? Like, in order to do this strategy, right? Like, this strategy of like, I give up, I surrender, fuck it, right? Like, in order to like employ that strategy, you have to get to a point where your sanity around food is more important than being thin.
And that's a really scary thing for people because it's easy. I think sometimes it's easy for a woman to say, okay, I really like the idea of not wanting to lose weight anymore. But there is so much fear and resistance around that. Like, I think it literally scares the crap out of women. And I'm sure some men too, but mainly women, though. That's what we're talking about here. Because they think they're going to then, lose that control, or it means like settling on kind of hating themselves. And there's so much fear around the possibility of gaining weight. And, that, and I think a lot of women maybe are listening to this and they're like, oh, that idea makes sense. I want to prioritize being sane around food, but they still have that resistance internally. So, I mean,
the thing that's funny about that, and I'm just going to, comment quickly on one thing you said is like, I'm afraid I'm going to lose control over food. It's like most of the women I'm talking to, and certainly I fell into this boat, I wasn't in control of food anyway. It's like, we're so afraid of losing control over something that we clearly just don't have control over. It's like you're pretending that you have control over it now anyway. You don't. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, you were running around. I mean, at least for me, like, I was running around, like, eating fluffernutter out of containers with a spoon, like, in the middle of the night, hoping no one caught me. Like, that is not control. Like, what control am I really giving up? I think of it as like, you're just working with the fact that you don't have control over food as opposed to working against it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And whether or not, some people have this similar actions, whether they're actually, like eating shit out of the cupboard and like, draining boxes of cookies, they may not, but they, I think a lot of that control just comes on, is in your head in terms of the way you're thinking about things and judging things as well.
Yeah. I mean, people think that like, people always assume the shit's going to hit the fan if I let myself eat whatever I want, if I like wasn't, shaming and judging. I think the vast majority of people do end up eating what they want anyway. I do think that like there is, I think that like control around food is kind of a myth. I don't really think we have as much control. I mean, like statistically speaking, like we definitely don't have as much control over as we think we do, or we wouldn't have this like insane statistic where like 98% of diets fail.
Yeah.
But ultimately, and then it kind of goes into this whole like sort of other question about, I mean, it's a very complex topic, but this whole other question about like weight set point theory and how much control do you actually even have over your weight? Like there's so many people who are quote unquote doing the right things with food and then just end up at, the weight that they end up at because of their genetics or whatever, and think there's something wrong with them. So, there's not, I mean, I think that as a culture and a society, we think we have far more control over these things in general than we actually have. And in trying to gain control over something that we don't actually have control over, we end up rebelling and we end up shooting ourselves in the foot. Like we end up making the situation far worse, in addition to the fact that we feel completely insane around food. I mean, like, that's just the little side note there. Yeah.
But so like, how does a woman let go of that kind of wanting to lose weight?
Yeah.
Like, cause it's, what does one do if we were to give somebody like a piece of advice about that?
Again, I think it goes back to like how, like, asking ourselves the question, like, what is more important, thinness or sanity? Right. And number two, there is something to be said for like, and this is kind of like a deeper spiritual question, but I choose today to take care of my body in a way that feels right for me and I choose to think of my body. I choose to feed my body like I would feed a child or even like an animal. You know, I don't think of my body as something to be manipulated. I don't think of myself as my body as something that I have control over the way it looks or the size or shape that it's going to be. I just want to care for it and love it and be there for it. And whatever shape or size, I trust that whatever shape or size it ends up at is the shape or size it's meant to be. And ultimately, I cannot want that, right? Like, I can be angry about the shape or is to force and manipulate and control and be crazy around food. Like, those are choices. Like, you have to, I think there's an aspect here where it's like you get to a point where you realize, like, what are my actual choices here? Like, my actual choices are I can just take care of and love and be gentle with and listen to my body and let her and relinquish the results. Like, right, like I always say, like, what are you in control of, your weight or your behaviors? You know, like,
yes,
I can only treat my body with love, respect, and kindness, and commit to doing what's right by her on a moment-to-moment basis, that as she lets me know what she wants and what she needs on a moment-to-moment basis, where she ends up, what she does when I treat her that way is up to her, right? Like, I can't force her into anything unless I want to be a fucking crazy person, you know, like, unless I want to be like an abusive slave master. Like, my body shape and weight and size isn't really up to me. It's not up to my brain.
Yeah.
The only thing I can do from my brain standpoint is just choose to treat my body well. When I'm choosing to treat my body well, when I'm being kind and gentle with my body, my body is going to do what it's going to do.
Yeah, I love it.
You know, and ultimately, if I'm treating my body well and being kind to my body and treating myself well, it's going to be the way it's supposed to be. It's going to be the way, like, God, if you will, or the universe or whatever intended it to be, right? Like, by definition, if I'm treating my body well, if I'm making choices for my body that are, loving and gentle and giving her what she wants, the weight she ends up with is going to be the weight that she wants to be, that she's happy at.
Yeah, and I think it's really, it's about, like, giving up that desire to want to change it. And this is where I think a lot of the quote unquote, body acceptance movement really makes me fucking angry sometimes because some health experts are, they're like, love your body, and they promote loving your body, but then they still promote changing your body. And, that's implying that there's still this conflict inside.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And I think, what we're saying here, what you're saying here, and what we want to be super clear on is that, you have to let go of that control of wanting to change your body.
Which is, like you said, so going back to your original question of sort of like, how do we do this? The reason that's hard is because is a cultural problem.
Yes.
The reason that's hard is because there is legitimately privilege given to thin people, and there's legitimate discrimination given to fat people, right? Like, that's why it's hard. It's not hard because, like, we were born with some, like, weird individual, like, psychosis where we want to be thin. Like, no, like, we were taught this shit. Like, it's not your fault that you want to be thin. You're not a bad person that you want to be thin. It is totally, like, natural, normal, like, biological instinct to seek love and acceptance and praise, which is something that as a society and a culture we give to thin people and something we take away from fat people.
Wow, that's really good.
Yeah, so, like, this is not, like, that's what pisses me off about a lot of the body image people. Most of the thin women who are talking about body image in this space, the vast majority of thin women talking about body image in space are not actually talking about the real social issues involved with, like, fat politics. And that's a huge problem because it's like we're just, like, going around telling people to like themselves without actually addressing the real issues going on.
Yeah, so talk to me more about that, like how, because, obviously in your bio, you want to create a greater cultural revolution. How can we do that? How can we promote this body acceptance as, as a culture and make that shift? And maybe because there's health experts out there, possibly including myself, who are like, oh, maybe I've never really spoken to it from that angle, or, how can I start to do that in a better way?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's a really, really good question. It's a big question. So number one is, and there's a lot of questions involved in this, because one of the difficult things about sort of the cultural bias against fat is that we have all of these rationalizations why we should believe that fat is inherently bad, right? Like particularly in the medical community and health community and stuff like that, which we now have a lot of, that's a whole conversation. Health at every size is like a whole nutshell in and of itself that maybe we'll get into. But the point is, it's like, I think we need to start sort of removing, we all were taught these biases around fat and thinness, right? Or we're all taught these, biases around weight in general. And we need to like slowly actually start to address them and pick them apart. So like pick an area, pick a reason why somebody might legitimately say, something I always ask my clients is like, tell me legitimately why you think it's wrong to be fat. And I'm not being flippant here. I'm being serious, because I know you have them, because I had them too, because we are all taught these things every single day.
Yeah, totally.
And let's literally go through them and like talk it out. Like, is this true? Like, body image work is about challenging your belief systems.
Totally.
Right? Like 100%. in the 1600s, like racism was just a fact. You know what I mean? Like no one like challenged that shit. Yeah. Right? Like it's like this, it's like any kind of
discrimination.
Exactly. Really. Any kind of oppression. Yeah. Like any kind of like sort of like cultural oppression. It's like, these are just questions. We have assumptions that we were taught, we were learned. It's not our fault at all that we were taught these assumptions and taught these biases. But now, just like, when I had bias awareness day in the 6th grade, let's challenge our assumptions. Let's challenge, why do I think this is bad? Why am I afraid of this? And challenge the assumption. So like big topics for fat activists are going to be things like the health conversation, which I could speak about at length. And there's also amazing, great books about it. Things like for women, something that comes up a lot, something that's come up a lot in my personal life is, romantic relationships. Like, well, what do I do? How do I deal with dating? How do I feel comfortable? How do I get comfortable with this size? How do I not want to be thin in a land where men are actively seeking or feel like they need to be with thin women?
Yeah, that's a huge one. Huge
one. I have a lot to say on that too. So you know what I mean? Like, let's stop talking about loving yourself as like a fairyland, like cloud in the sky concept. And let's actually start talking about the real issues that people are dealing with body image and start talking about them. Mm-hmm. And that's how we're going to that's how we create the cultural revolution, is we start actually living our lives in line with our values, right? So like one thing that, sometimes the answer is like, for example, with men, I'll just go into that example.
I want you to, actually, I really do, because I know the listeners, because I know I hear it from my clients so often. So please go into that, because I think people are going to really need to hear it.
Okay, cool. So I've never actually spoken about this story in public, but I guess I'll just tell it.
Yeah.
So I remember, like, it was like, a few years ago, I just remember like, I remember I was kind of like hooking up with this guy, for lack of a better phrase. I'll just like put it like that. Like, yep. we were hooking up,
Use your own imagination.
Yeah, exactly. But like, we weren't dating, like we weren't in a relationship, like generally speaking, like it was like new and it was early and we were friends for a long time before. And I was like madly in love with him before this happened. And, really, I think it was just like, it was an unrequited love situation, sort of, but it was like it was complicated by all these factors of like, but we were, such great friends. And I I know he loves me so much as a person. So of course in my head, I'm like, why the fuck don't you want to be with me? There must be something wrong with me. Like, we're not together because you just aren't quote unquote attracted to me enough, like that kind of thing. Like, why aren't we together? If you love me so much as a friend, it must be about my body, da, da, da. And I would go around and I will just say this. I still to this day, I really do think that if I lost 30 pounds, we might be together, or like he would be suddenly interested in me. Like when I started taking drugs, and like stimulants and like lost a bunch of weight in college, the number of guys who wanted to fuck me went up a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that's a reality. Like that is a reality, right?
Yeah.
Like no one's going to deny, like I think body image activists who deny shit like that are not doing anyone a service, because like we know what the fuck is true.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true.
Right. So like I am fairly convinced, like I'm like pretty sure. So like in my heart of hearts, like I don't know, he's never said that, but in my heart of hearts, like I was like, I just really feel like I'm just like pretty sure, like I feel like this is just like I know that like if I looked the way I looked in college, I'm pretty sure he would have been interested in dating me in college. We knew, yeah. And it makes me feel bad. It makes me feel like, well, if I lost a bunch of weight, we would be together. And I remember I would cry to my girlfriends about this, my thin girlfriends, and they would be like, oh, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. That's not it. Like if you look different, it wouldn't change a thing. And I never really believed them. And that's why I like was never able. And I'd be like, yeah, I guess, yeah, you're right. Like,
he doesn't like my personality.
yeah, exactly. And then I got on the phone with a friend of mine who's a fat activist. And she was like, she basically said to me, she was like, do you really believe in your heart that like, if you lost 30 pounds, you would be together? And I was like, you know what? Like, I really kind of do. Like, I don't have proof. Like, I might be crazy, but like, I really do kind of feel like if I lost 30 or 40 pounds, like we would be together. And she was like, okay, if it's in your intuition, if that's how you feel, then like, let's just take that as fact. Because like, if that's how you feel, like, then that's what we're working with. So let's just honor that. Okay. For the sake of argument. And I was like, all right. Okay. She was like, okay, so now we're working with a fact, which is that you want to be with this guy and he doesn't want to be with you because you're 30 pounds heavier than, he thinks you should be or whatever. Like, we don't really know if that's true, but like, if that's how you feel, then it's true enough.
Yeah.
Right? And she said, now, given these like new facts that we have, do you want to be with somebody who needs you to be 30 pounds lighter than you are? Is that a person you really want to be with?
Yeah.
Is that in line with your value system? Is that a person you want to have kids with?
Some people might say yes, unfortunately.
Right. But that's where the cultural shift is happening, is in changing your value system. Mm-hmm. Right. So like my value system right now is a value system of body positivity. Yeah. I choose a value system today, right? Like my body positivity today is a value system. Meaning like I have made the personal decision for myself that I will not, to the best of my ability, judge other people on the basis of size. And I choose to spend time with people who love me in my body right now, as it exists right now, no matter what. Also, just to go back for any of those people who are like, yes, I do want to be with a man who wants me to be 30 pounds thinner. Like, again, it goes back to the idea, like, in order for me to be 30 pounds thinner, I would likely have to be a crazy person around food.
Yeah.
And also, even if I was able to lose that weight, which for me, I'm really not sure is possible. Even if I was able to lose weight and get down to the weight that he wanted me to be, what happens when I get older? What happens when my body changes as I age? What happens when I get pregnant? Do I constantly live in fear that the man I love is going to leave me if I gain weight? Can you imagine how fucked up that would make a person's food?
Yeah.
How could you not be obsessed with food if you were afraid that your husband or the man you loved or your partner was going to leave you if you gained weight?
Yeah, so I mean, really then comes back to, again, like that your intention to not be obsessed with food must be greater than
exactly
your need. And I think that comes to like, a need for acceptance from other people, a need for approval from other people, versus having your own self-worth and respect as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's like, again, it's like this myth of control. It's like this myth of approval and acceptance is just pervasive. Like, we think we can control how other people feel about us. We can't.
Yeah, totally.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like, you could be thin and like still not have acceptance. Like, trust me. I mean, fat discrimination and thin privilege is real for sure. But let's also not like, and important, and we need to talk about that. We need to be having cultural conversations about that. However, like, let's not delude ourselves into thinking that by controlling our weight, we can control the entire universe.
Which I think is what, I think that's what people really have to challenge themselves on is really asking yourself, like, why do you want to lose this weight? And keep asking why until you get to the root of it. Because that I often, well, at least in my experience, it comes back to a perfectionist tendency to want approval and from others.
Yeah, 100%.
And
that's the only. That's just straight up the only reason why anyone has food issues is because they want to be loved.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it's really important for people to recognize that. Right. And I think that's a really big aha for a lot of people because, I think most people don't take the time to dig into it and they just see it from a very superficial perspective in that, okay, if I lose this weight, then I can date this guy. But they don't look at the deeper meaning behind it, which is like seeking that love.
Well, it's also like the idea, and this is another sort of concept within fat activism is like there will be a man who likes you at your current weight. Like fat people get married every day. Mm-hmm. Like 60% of the country of the United States is fat, and they are all getting, I mean, not all, but like, most, I would say that probably my guess is that the majority of them are getting laid.
Yeah.
So like, that's like a whole nother thing to remember. It's like, again, like I could be crazy and have this guy. I could be crazy around food, forcing and manipulating being abusive. Let's just be real, being abusive to my body.
Yep, that's what it is.
Yeah, it's abusive. I could be abusive to my body to get this guy over here. Or I could just look for the man who loves me as I am.
Yep.
Like, wouldn't it, like I started to think about it, like with this the example that I was giving before, I started to think about it and I was like, or I could just look for the guy who likes me as I am. Like, he, like, probably exists. Like, fat people get married every day.
Yeah.
Like, I know there's tons of dudes who are attracted to me. Like, tons of dudes are attracted to me. Why would I abuse my body to get somebody else to be attracted to me? It makes, like, when I really started to think about it, like, made no sense. It's like, why wouldn't I, like, choose to be with people who allow me to be myself? Like, I think that's a really big value system. It's like, yeah, like you said, going back to this idea of like, I choose to, for me today, it is a requirement. It is a requirement that any man I date, like it is like my number one requirement for men is like, they need to like my body the way it is. Like if they don't, they're just off the table as an option. They're just not an option. Like it's just, I'm not interested.
I think it's like they need to like your body the way it is, but also with the fluctuations that come with it.
Yeah.
And loving you despite any body changes that you may have, just like the same way that we're encouraging people to love themselves whatever and in whatever shape and size that they're given.
Totally. Like Virgie Tovar, who's a really famous fat activist and a friend of mine and just an all-out amazing, awesome badass, said that she had a personal rule that any man, at one point she said to me that basically she had a personal rule that a man not only has to love me the way I am, but I have to have reason to believe that they would be okay if I gained, say, 30 pounds.
Exactly. I think that's so important.
This episode of Fearless Rebel Radio is brought to you by Lamely. So several years ago, a small company called Lamely released a realistically proportioned fashion doll called the Traveler to help boost self-esteem and body image for kids. They were all over the news on CNN, ABC, Time, because this was a doll with average size body proportions. Imagine that. And even better, get this, they also came out with a set of reusable stickers so that this doll or any fashion doll can have things like stretch marks, acne, and cellulite. How cool is that? Right now, they're sending me this doll and the sticker pack, and I can't wait to get it and use it with my unborn child in the future. She has super soft brunette hair, seamless articulation, small details like realistic hands and feet. These are little details which we know kids appreciate. The company decided to retire this first edition Traveler doll earlier this year, so there aren't that many left, but you can get your hands on the first edition Traveler doll and a free sticker pack with the things like stretch marks, acne, and cellulite if you go to lamely.com/fearless. That's Lamily, LAMMILY.com/fearless. Check it out. The holidays aren't that far away, and this would make an amazing gift.
You mentioned your value system and being around people who like you and in the body that you have. So I hear this from so many women, and especially my clients, that they have people in their life, and often it's like their mothers or their family members who feed that, who bring them down, who go against that value system, like who step on those values. So, they'll say things to them like, oh, you shouldn't eat that, or, your stomach is looking bigger today. And it's really easy in the context of dating to say, well, I just won't talk to that person again. I'll cut them out of my life. But when it's like your mother or a very close family member, how do you deal with that type of situation?
So there's a few different ways to deal with it depending kind of where you are on this journey. And this is definitely a journey. There's like markers of like progress and like markers of just like where you are and what you might need at different points. So like I say, like, when I was, kind of new to all of this, like I actually needed to have conversations with people in my family and be like, I would really like for you to not comment on my weight because like I'm trying to like work through whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like you can actually have those conversations. Now, whether or not people respect those conversations or not is not in your control, right? Not in your control. So like, that's like plan A. You can have those conversations. The thing about those conversations is that like there's very little you can do about whether or not people actually respect your, anytime you're laying down a boundary, you can lay down a boundary, but you have no control over whether or not people respect the boundary. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and I do think there's something to be said for at some point, like you're going to be around, let's call it fat phobia, right? Because that's a word that I'm comfortable with using.
Yeah.
But like, you're going to be around like fat phobic people forever. I mean, like it doesn't seem to be, as much as I want to create the cultural revolution is happening. It's not going to go away tomorrow. Like this is going to be around for a little while.
Totally.
Right? This is going to take generations probably to like eke its way out of the culture. And fat phobia is going to be something that every single person in the world pretty much is going to be exposed to in different iterations. The issue then just becomes like how you respond and how you react to fat phobia. So in the beginning, I think what's hard for people when they interact with fat phobic comments or fat phobic people or fat phobic magazine articles or literature or whatever, I mean, it's so pervasive, it's everywhere. I think in the beginning, what ends up happening is people get really freaked out because they're like, oh shit, what if they're right?
Yeah.
When we get upset about a fat phobic comment, it's like we get upset because we're afraid that they're right. Mm-hmm. We get upset because we're still working through. I mean, there's two types of getting upset, right? Like I get upset in the sense of like, I get angry that that's happening. Like, I'm like, oh, yes. Like it's so annoying that we live in this culture. So there's that type of upset, which probably never goes away. I still get really upset. I mean, this morning I was really upset about just like, oh my God, like I can't stand all of this like bullshit anymore. Like, it's upsetting. Once you really get to the other side and like see how fucked up this, like, just like all the like fat discrimination and weight discrimination is, like it'll make you really angry. And I think anger is actually not a bad phase to go through with this.
Yeah.
But at some point, there's some level of like when it triggers us, right? Like when it triggers us into wanting to diet, or when it's like the type of upset where it's like triggering us into behavior, it triggers us into behavior because we're still like, we're nervous they're right, So I think that as we start to become more and more convicted in our beliefs, and as we more and more start to pursue creating a community of people and creating a culture around us that supports our belief system, that starts to the how upset we are made by those comments on a personal level starts to diminish. Although it will always make you angry, it doesn't like have that same triggering effect, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can relate to that 110%. I think it's like, because I've come out on that other side, and so
yeah.
For the longest time when I was exposed to those types of things, which I was a lot of, it would drive me into very, like disordered patterns and behavior. Like I'd be like, oh, well then fuck you. I'm going to go like not, cut my calories for a week or whatever. Like that's the way that I would deal with it. But now it's, now it doesn't affect my, like, the way I feel about myself. It makes me angry, and I notice it, and I notice like it's like the rampantness of it in every aspect, and right. Especially like with media and like social media and whatever. It's just, and just with everyday life and interacting with people, like it is right. Just, it's just there.
Well, you get to a point where you start to see it not as your problem, but as their problem. Mm-hmm. Like you get to a point where you're like if I saw like a magazine article, if I saw, like the Dr. Oz, like lose your ugly fat or whatever, I would like, in my head, like I'm at a point now where like at one point in my life, I'd be like, oh my gosh, my fat's so ugly. I'd make it about me. There's something wrong with me. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Me. Now I'm at a point where I'm like, you are such an asshole, right? Like it's your problem, right? So it's about, we get to a point as time goes on and we start to really, I think, again, it comes down to really understanding the social politics around weight discrimination and kind of, I highly encourage everyone to sort of like research that and get into that. The deeper you get into that work and understanding and sort of education, the more you really get clear, like, oh, this is so not about me. This is so about like all of y'all being fucked up.
Yeah. And so, you say, you encourage us to like, start to really get into the social politics of weight discrimination. But where does someone start with that? Like just for people listening, like where would they go?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. So I'll just name drop some of my favorite fat activists who are really talking about this on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. So Virgie Tovar, who I've already name dropped in this conversation she's probably my favorite. She, I just love her to death. From a personal standpoint, I love her to death, but she's just this incredibly entertaining, bubbly, just wonderful personality. And she is so effing smart. It's insane. She really knows her shit. And she is like one of the major pioneers on the fat, sort of in the fat studies world.
Nice.
And so she's like she is a true activist, right? It's fat activism, right? It's the people that you want to be sort of like, who I encourage you to sort of like read what they're writing, are fat activists, right? They're activists. They're political. They're taking an active political stance, which is, I do that to a certain extent, but like I'm a health coach, right? Like I have an understanding and I have a perspective and a lens through which I do my work. I think everyone does. Like everything you do through the lens of your politics to some extent, no matter what. Yeah. Right. Like you do through your social understanding, no matter what. But I'm not out there like being an activist for a living. Like there's a group of women who are like, that's their livelihood, is like they're out there like fighting the fight of, against weight discrimination and for people of all shapes and sizes to be treated with like the same like civil rights, literally. Yeah. Which are now actually seriously being compromised in a lot of different areas, which is a whole nother really interesting conversation. So Virgie Tovar is one of them. Who else? Reagan Chastain is very brilliant. She has very smart. She's a researcher. She was out there looking for the best diet. She is literally a science researcher who was like, I am going to use my research skills to find out which diet actually has the single best success rate, so that I could do that to lose weight. And what she found was that there was literally none. There was no diet that existed that had any clinical evidence of having a success rate beyond 3 or 4% or something crazy. And that's when she started reading. She got into Health at Every Size and started researching. Health at Every Size also is a piece of literature that I think a lot of y'all will probably find really interesting. Health at Every Size is a book of research by a woman named Linda Bacon, who basically she studied obesity and weight and diet and food related behaviors for about 20 years. She had a crazy amount of research, crazy amount of evidence, and sort of clinical support that she actually wasn't looking to find. She wasn't doing this study for the purpose of finding these conclusions, but the conclusions of the study, she's a thin woman, the conclusions of the study happened to be that a person's weight didn't necessarily dictate their health status.
That's awesome.
Yeah. She was like, you actually can be fat and healthy.
Yeah.
Just like you can be thin and unhealthy, right?
Exactly.
She was the person who basically was like, there is some level of correlation, right? Meaning if you're engaging in quote unquote unhealthful behaviors, you're drinking soda all day long and not taking care of your, and just eating shit. This is mainly, by the way, also, this is largely a socioeconomic problem and has more to do with access to vegetables and fruits than anything else.
Yeah.
But so that's a whole nother conversation. But basically she was like, there's some level of correlation between unhealth and fat, because there's a lot of the foods that people are eating that cause unhealth, right, or cause blood sugar issues or whatever, also are highly caloric. But at the end of the day, if you're fat and eating healthful foods, you're a healthful person.
Totally.
So that was pretty groundbreaking shit, because most people, that is our big national cultural defense for fat discrimination right now, is the health argument, which doesn't actually really seem to stand up to much science, which is really interesting. But there's, again, so much money in the weight loss industry, and so much money in just the medical industry overall in maintaining this myth, that this has kind of been an uphill battle for a lot of researchers. But there's more and more researchers who are studying obesity. I feel once a month another book comes out by some PhD or some doctor or some medical researcher who was like, oh, that's so weird. We just found out that actually you can be fat and healthy. It's really strange. Somebody come look at this.
Yeah, it's kind of it's kind of like everything with nutrition science, really, is that it's oh no, wait, we were actually wrong about that. That food's actually okay for you. So we'll just sweep that under the rug and move on.
It's really super interesting. And there's a lot of and this is where I think the fat activists, and there's especially academics writing this or saying some really interesting things. It's you can actually trace back in time in the past 100 years or less when the medical, it wasn't so long ago that we actually thought fat was a good thing for your health. Mm-hmm. And then it turned at some point, right? Medicine is not just straight fact. Medicine is socially influenced.
Yep.
So like medical sociology is so fascinating to me because it's like we are running around like thinking that like every like if there's like a study, then it's fact. And it's like actually like statistics can be really skewed. And like depending on who's like doing this research, like lots of things can be screwed up,
biased, and oh my gosh, don't get me started on that.
So anyway, so we can actually pinpoint pretty much like down to a few like core political incidents, and mainly having to do with insurance companies, if that's a shocker, where fat started to become really villainized and losing weight became a medical suggestion. Yeah.
No, that's so interesting. And I just love that you brought that up. And I'll link to all those people in the show notes so that people have it too. I do. I know we're starting to cut close on time, but I want to ask you one more thing, and then like wrap up with the final two questions that I wanted to ask you. But really quickly, like, because I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with, is that they have to restrict foods for a specific reason. So maybe they have like major digestive troubles or like candida or, food sensitivities or whatever. So they actually do have to control those foods.
Yep.
I see this so often. How do you find balance between those two things, between letting things just be as they are and, giving up control around food versus having to do it because your body needs you to do it?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. This is like one of my favorite questions of all time. So,
well, then I'm glad that I'm squeaking this a little longer.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. Like, people are often really surprised to hear this, but I actually don't really eat gluten. And that's because like when I eat gluten, like I get like a stomach ache and I have like some like digestive upsets. It's not the end of the world if I eat gluten, but like I've kind of like made a choice that like I'm going to try to avoid gluten like to the best of my ability because it like makes me sick. And also like I have some like history of like autoimmune diseases that may be linked to gluten. And I have reason to believe that if I like just was haphazardly eating gluten all the time, that like it may be detrimental to my health long term.
Yeah.
So people are like, I always think people are going to be surprised when they hear this. But the thing is like your intentions and your motivations behind why you're cutting out certain foods is incredibly important because again, binge eating isn't necessarily about the intuitive eating versus the dieting versus the whatever. And I think that feeling sane around food is not about what choices you're making around food. It's about how you feel about the choices that you're making around food.
Yes.
So like if I were to eat if I were to eat, like go and have a piece of bread right now, I wouldn't feel guilty or ashamed. I'd just have a stomach ache.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing wrong. Like there's nothing morally wrong with me having a piece of bread. It's just that the consequence of me having a piece of bread is that I'm going to have a stomach ache. Right?
Yeah.
That's it. Right?
It's not the consequence of hating yourself and trying to get it all in, right?
Right. Like I'm actually allowed to have bread. I'm allowed to have gluten. It's just that I choose not to have gluten because it's going to make me feel like shit, not only in the short term, but possibly very sick in the long term.
So I think, again, it comes back to still prioritizing, wanting to ditch the crazy obsession versus, having to make choices from a place of love and because you care about your body.
I think that when our motivation is clouded by a motivation to lose weight, shit gets very complicated. I think that
is the headline. Yeah. I've ever heard it better summed up.
Exactly. Like I really feel like it is very difficult to make health decisions for health in quotes around food when you're also secretly hoping that those healthful decisions are going to make you thinner.
Yes.
And I think that that's why it's so critically important that not only as individuals, but as a culture, we separate weight and health, because in combining them, we've created a lot of unhealth, right? Like we have a lot of people who are like, oh shit, my doctor told me I need to lose 20 pounds. So I'm just going to keep smoking because when I don't smoke, I eat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, well, what if we just told her that like she was allowed to eat, but just like to eat like the foods that are good for her, whatever, So I think that it's really when you're making healthful in quotes decisions, when you're making decisions for pure health, and it's like complicated by this like desire to lose weight, I think that's where shit gets murky. So I think that a lot of the decisions to like just make choices for health tend to settle down on their own when you're clear that you're not making those decisions for weight. And also you don't give a shit about your weight in the process. And so I'll give you an example, so I think this is important. When I gave up gluten, I was eating tons of gluten-free shit. Like when I first gave up gluten, I was just like going to like gluten-free bakeries and I would just like buy like 3 gluten-free muffins and like sit down and eat them.
I hear ya.
I'm sure that I did end up gaining weight temporarily when I first gave up gluten because I was definitely compensating for giving up some of my favorite foods by like running to bakeries and like buying, like I still had a little bit of that rebellion deprivation shit in the beginning because I was like a little bit nervous about like not being able to eat the foods I want. And I did have a little bit of that natural instinctive fear of deprivation going on when I gave up gluten. And I'm sure that I rebelled with gluten-free shit a little bit, right? And I like ate a bunch of gluten-free shit to like make me feel safer and make me feel like I wasn't going to deprive myself. And I'm sure I gained weight. But at the end of the day, like I made the decision that I was going to be okay gaining weight because like my health was more important. Like, yeah. You know what I mean? Like I knew that like I might rebel by giving up gluten and that I might gain weight if I gave up gluten because I might just want to go eat a bunch of gluten-free shit, which is actually what happened. But it was like, I decided that giving up gluten was more important. Like giving up gluten for my health, for health reasons, it was like, I was willing to gain weight for that.
And I think that's also just for your sanity, really, as well. Yeah. Your sanity was more important.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like, you know, don't be like when we start to get into the like, I'm making healthy choices and maybe this will help me lose weight in parentheses. That's, I think, when we start to like get a little bit, things get to start really get complicated. And I think that we need to like be making healthful choices with this like clear mantra and this clear understanding, like my weight is not in my control. All I can do is take care of my body to the best of my ability. What happens to my weight is what happens to my weight is what happens to my weight. I have no control over what my body chooses to show up as tomorrow. All I can do is just treat her well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. So now we have to actually wrap things up. Okay. 2 last questions for you. The one question I like to ask all of my guests is, what is the most fearless thing that you have done?
Ooh. Honestly, the most fearless thing I ever did was decide that I wasn't going to control my food at all, no matter what.
I love that you said that. I had somebody else on the Kristen Scott Dixon, which I don't know if you know her. She's amazing. I think it was episode number 4, but she said something very similar. And I was just like, wow, that's so kick-ass.
Yeah. Like, how true is that? Like, how fucking true? Like, the most fearless thing I ever did was basically, because what I was really staring in the face at the time was my fear of maybe not being able to control how other people feel about me, right? Of maybe not everyone loving me because maybe not everyone would think that my body was perfect and gorgeous and whatever, right? Like I was staring, you know, I was really staring the fear in the face of what if I gain weight?
Yeah, that's awesome.
You know? And I just decided, you know,
step into it. Step into the fear and get through it.
This shit is so not worth it. Like, I can't, like, at that point, I was like, my whole life has revolved around this thing. And I don't see this ending any other way, but then to just decide that I'm okay right now.
Yeah, I love it. That's awesome. So tell us about Stop Fighting Food, because I got a preview of it, of some of the videos, and I am really excited.
Yay! Oh my gosh, I am so excited.
Yeah, you should be.
Yeah. So Stop Fighting Food. So basically, Stop Fighting Food kind of has 2 parts. So I created this video training series. It's a free video training series. You know, anyone who's listening to this who doesn't think I'm totally insane should go check it out. I think the link will be in the show notes, right? For Stop Fighting Food.
Oh yeah.
So the free video training series is kind of like this introduction to my work. And it, you know, we talked a lot about like sort of like basic concepts around, you know, control around food. And I actually go into a little bit more depth in Stop Fighting Food about, you know, basic concepts that people often struggle with when they're transitioning into intuitive eating, things like emotional eating versus binge eating, like what causes these things, like why are these things happening, what do I do about them? You know, that's sort of like my forte, as I talk about binge eating and emotional eating a lot. And my just particular perspective on it is that it has a lot more to do with body image than people tend to think.
Yep.
But there's a lot of other things involved with it, and sort of, you know, again, go check it out. It's awesome. So that's sort of like the video training series, the free video training series is like, you know, a good introduction to my work for anyone who's interested in what I do. And then there's also, I'm working on a Stop Fighting Food masterclass right now, which is going to be released probably a week and a half or 2 weeks after the video trainings, after today. Actually, I'm not sure like what the day is, but soon, in the next like week or and a half or 2 weeks.
Probably when this goes live, because this will be live in about a week.
Okay. So, yeah, exactly. So very soon thereafter, there's also like a greater sort of program that I'm going to be launching around Stop Fighting Food that'll just go into like way more depth and go into some of the deeper, bigger questions that we kind of started to talk about today. So anyway, the point is, Stop Fighting Food is this like awesome flagship program that I've created that talks about all of these ideas and goes into a lot more depth about how to really regain your sanity with food and stop feeling like a crazy person, like rummaging through their cabinets, not being able to stop eating peanut butter out of jars, if that's something that you relate to.
Yeah, which I think a lot of people do.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, body image is a huge part of that. Relinquishing control, a huge part of that. So, you know, I think unfortunately there's so many women who are dealing with this. It's just a matter of spectrum. Like I often think about it. It's not really people who are and aren't dealing with it. It's like, where are you on the spectrum? You know, like
I think that's actually a really important distinction, because, you know, you obviously use the word binge eating a lot. And I think that some people don't understand that, you know, that is a spectrum, and that it's not, you know, it's not necessarily like the clinical definition of the eating disorder, I think, right? Like, Well,
I have a very specific definition of the word binge eating, which is not clinical at all, which I literally just made up.
Yeah. Do you want to just like spell, we should have spelled that at the beginning.
Yeah. We should. I was like, that's like a basic one. We didn't even talk about binge eating. Like, what's going on? So basically, binge eating is, you know, is a reaction to deprivation. It's rebellion eating. It's, I fell off the diet. I might as well eat everything that isn't nailed down right now, because tomorrow I'm going to get back on the diet and I won't be able to eat these things, right? So it's like, I'm not sure when I'm ever going to be able to eat a cookie again. So like, I need to eat all the stale cookies in the corporate kitchen right now because like they're there and I might not ever see one again. Like, it's a reaction to dieting. Dieting teaches us how to binge eat. Without dieting, without restriction, without judgment and shame around food, binge eating doesn't really exist at all.
Yeah.
And binge eating, you know, and I talk about this definitely in the video series specifically, but binge eating, like binge eating has nothing to do with volume of food. Binge eating has to do with the intention and the motivation behind it. Like, if you're eating from a place of, in some sort of reaction to deprivation, either fear of future deprivation, or conversely, I've been dieting and I've been keeping myself back from the cookies for so long, I can't fucking hold it any longer, and I'm just going to dive into the cookies right now because I've been holding myself back for 6 weeks or whatever. You know, so it's either a reaction to a current deprivation that's going on, or it's a reaction to a fear of future deprivation. Now, when we feel shame and judgment around food, generally speaking, that triggers a fear of future deprivation, because like when we feel fear and judgment and think that we did something wrong, immediately your body's like, oh, she's going to take it away. Mm-hmm. So it's like when we feel fear and judgment around food, that's like creates binge eating right there, because it's like just by feeling fear and shame and guilt about something we eat, we start to fear the impending deprivation that historically has always come after feeling anxious and shameful and guilty about food.
Yeah, so you got to get it in all now.
Exactly.
I think that, I'm really glad you said that, because that was something we probably should have talked about. Yeah. Clarified right off the top. But
exactly. And binge eating is very different from emotional eating, right? Emotional eating is exactly what it sounds like. It's just like eating over feelings. It's just like, I'm bored, I'm going to have a cupcake. I'm sad, I'm lonely, this will ground me. You know, emotional eating is an entirely different beast. They often get confused, right? You say emotional eating and binge eating
they get intertwined, right?
Exactly. People don't know the difference between emotional eating and binge eating. It's like, when I ask people what's the difference between emotional eating and binge eating, they usually say, oh, binge eating is just eating more.
Totally.
And it's like, no, that's not the difference, right? Like, that's such an arbitrary difference. Like, if it was just eating more, like, that means, like, who defines that? Like, who decides what more is? Like, at what point does emotional eating become a binge, right? Like, it's not, that's a bullshit definition. The difference between emotional eating and binge eating has to do with the cause.
Yeah.
Has to do with the intention or motive, drive behind it. What's creating it.
Yeah, and the aftermath of the feelings, right? Like, I think that's a big part of it too.
Yeah. Although a lot of people feel guilty and shameful when they eat emotionally, and then it turns into a binge.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, true. Very true. Yeah, no, I actually, because I know in one of the videos in the free training series, like you kind of spell out those differences. So definitely, like, to the people listening to this, check that out, because your analogy is really, really good with that. And I love it.
Thanks. Yay.
Yeah.
So that's the type of like stuff that you're going to get. That's the type of info I'm spewing in the video training series, if you're interested.
Yeah, it's pretty kick-ass. Like, you rule pretty much.
Thank you.
So, I will link to all the stuff in the show notes. So I think most of it probably can be found on isabelfoxenduke.com, I'm assuming.
No, actually, it's all stopfightingfood.com.
Oh, okay. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Stopfightingfood.com.
All the Stop Fighting Food stuff is on stopfightingfood.com. Although my blog is on isabelfoxenduke.com, which is also, like, great information. But we made a separate website for the Stop Fighting Food extravaganza going on. So.
Okay, perfect. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm glad I clarified that.
You'll find it either way. But yeah, Stop Fighting Food stuff's on Stop Fighting Food. So there you go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all of your time. I know we ran over a bit, but I probably need to have you back sometime in the future, because I feel like we could go on and on. I think this will probably be one of the best episodes, but definitely check out isabelfoxenduke.com and stopfightingfood.com. which again launches Tuesday, September 16th. And you really, really, really want to sign up for this. It's so awesome. So again, that's stopfightingfood.com. Thank you so much for being here, Isabel. It was fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me, Summer. This was awesome.
Yes, this was awesome. I loved it. And that's it. So until next time, rock on.
So many good quotes in that episode. I hope you enjoyed hearing it for the first time or listening to it again. Don't forget to get Isabel's free video training program, Stop Fighting Food. You can find the link to that in the show notes for this episode at summerinanen.com/136. And I will talk to you soon. Rock on. I'm Summer Inanen, and I want to thank you for listening today. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Summer Inanen. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this show. I would be so grateful. Until next time, rock on.